Hey there, I'm Kimberly Dark, and it's my pleasure to be with you for another Hope Desk. I literally have been out of the country for the last month. I just flew in, and I'm glad we're doing this. And at least one of the questions that I'm dealing with today came as a result of the journey that I just took. I've been in South Africa and Qatar for the last month. So, hey, this is a thing that we do every month. I'm a writer and sociologist and storyteller, and I have simple answers for you about some of your questions about social inequality. Just as a reminder, I don't have all the answers. I don't have the only right answers, but I will spend this time trying to put forth some sociologically informed answers so that it is easier to have public conversations in a civil fashion about things that affect our lives, because I think that's hopeful. I usually offer you some articles to read for greater depth, but they're not scholarly articles. You know, I'm not here to give you that take. In many cases, other people are better qualified to do that than I am on these particular topics. But you are always welcome to ask questions for the Hope Desk going forward, and I keep a list, So yeah, today we are going to handle these questions. One is about the truth and reconciliation process in South Africa. I've ended up in a couple of conversations during the time that I was there regarding, people were asking me, would this work in the United States? And I think that is a really interesting thing to explore. So we will. And then the other topic has to do with the shooting in Uvalde, Texas recently at the elementary school. And the question is around, like, how are police trained? Because there was a massive police failure there. The police were actually there before the shooting started, and so I'm sorry to say, here's your spoiler alert. Did you know that there is no legal precedent to hold police accountable to protecting human life? So we're going to talk a little bit about how police in the US are trained, but also really what their function is, like what can they actually be held accountable for? Because a lot of folks are talking right now about, will those officers be held accountable for not intervening more successfully? And it is unlikely that they will. But let's talk about the truth and reconciliation process in South Africa first. So hey. Oh wait, what? Oh no, there we go. I thought I had this in the right order. So some of you may have heard about South Africa's truth and reconciliation process. And I just want to say, I know a thimbleful about this, but I am going to also comment on how and whether I think this might work in the United States. And these are the conversations that I think that we ought to be having in meaningful ways, in casual ways, just as we go about our lives. Because this process is not unique to South Africa. There have been loads of nations, not enough, but more than a handful, that have done some kind of truth and reconciliation process when they are in a moment of big political change and there has been massive violence and things that people need to figure out as a culture how to forgive enough to move on. Now, this is a really significant thing about any truth and reconciliation process. It is about restoring the society as a whole, not necessarily about prompting individuals to forgive other individuals, because that's up to individuals, right? And when there has been a lot of violence and mayhem, that might be too much to ask. But truth commissions exist because they deal with issues that are too big and too systemic to fit into the parameters of something like a criminal trial. There may also be criminal trials for things like war crimes or, individual crimes that people have committed and wish to hold each other accountable for. But that's not what this is. It's not a criminal trial. These kind of truth commissions operate under a kind of radical concept, really, that all of society has a right to know fully what happened and how and why, so that people's actual pain and grief is revealed publicly. And that's kind of a radical thing. And I want to say, if you're ever in Johannesburg, the Apartheid Museum is really worth some time. I spent probably a day and a half there, and I became fascinated with this truth and reconciliation process, and in specific thinking about how something like that might function in the United States. So these processes expose the extent of atrocities, and they aim to, really get at what allowed such horrific things to happen, in the hope that the knowledge could prevent them from happening again. And also to connect people with their feelings, as opposed to just their ideologies. Yeah, and that's kind of a big deal. So here's the significant thing, is that these kind of processes, as they did in South Africa, generally happen when a radical shift is taking place in the culture. So for instance, when Nelson Mandela was literally imprisoned in a very small cell under terrible circumstances for 27 years, and then a year after his release was president of the nation, like, that is a radical shift. And I have to say, I have even greater respect for him, not just as an individual, but as a political strategist, than I did before. So similarly, in Peru, in Argentina, when these kind of processes have happened, they have been at a time when a revolution has taken place of some kind. And that is the main thing that we lack here in the United States with regard to would a process like this work and be functional here. It also needs to be non-political, like non-partisan. So for instance, in South Africa, it was overseen by Bishop Desmond Tutu. This is another problem, is that the United States, because we have a two-party system, we're a little screwed up, right? Like cognitively and linguistically, a two-party political system leads us to constantly pick a side and other the folks on the other side, right? It's not conducive to, like, I don't know if you've noticed this, but as soon as somebody doesn't like a certain policy, they don't go to discussing the policy first. They usually go right to, well, those stupid Democrats or those stupid Republicans, rather than actually addressing, the meat of the issue. So all of this said, there have been some examples of truth and reconciliation processes in the United States with regard to specific incidents. And I would love for Emily, would you share the two articles? One is from Vox and the other from Politico. And you can read some more about some of these that have taken place in the United States, where people have had a chance to publicly share atrocities and grief that they have endured in order for a city or an area to move forward about a certain event. So I think this is a process that is going to be absolutely vital in the United States when it is our time. But the thing is, in our country, we continue to claim to not know about the specific atrocities of white supremacy and misogyny. We claim not to know about them as a nation. And so we're still in this space where, people are like literally right now passing laws that you cannot speak accurately about history in public schools. I mean, we are not in a place where we are acknowledging, what has happened in our nation, let alone shifting away from it. Here's the other thing too, I think that we deal with in the United States, and this is true to a certain extent in some of the other countries that have dealt with, that have enacted these processes, is that we have a lot of groups with which this needs to happen. So definitely white supremacy has to do with the history of slavery and Jim Crow laws and the kinds of systemic barricades to wealth and power that have always taken place for Black people in the United States. But whoa, there is also theft of indigenous land and the mass abduction of indigenous children and sending them to, sending them to their death or sending them to retraining schools in order to make servants out of them and take their culture away. I mean, there are multiple vectors about truth and reconciliation that need to happen in our country. So, sadly, we are not in the middle of a large political transition. But when we are, I think that this is going to be a vital process. I want to say, too, that the South African process is not perfect. People were able to seek pardons for their crimes by telling the truth, and not all of them received them. There was also meant to be a reparations process involved in this that never totally was fulfilled. In certain ways it came to fruition, but not totally. There's come to be a South African saying since the time of this shift over in this political transition in the 90s. And that is, they gave us the throne but kept the jewels. And this is a striking thing that I certainly noticed during my time in South Africa as well, is that white wealth has been left largely undisturbed. There is now a Black middle class, but when you're in rich areas, it is still primarily white people around you. When you are in very poor areas, it is still Black and colored people around you. Those are the words that they would use to describe those groups. Does anyone have comments or questions about this topic? And and the possible applications in the United States? All right, you can.
Did I let people unmute themselves? Let me just make sure. Yes, I have. Okay.
Yeah, great. So you have the ability to unmute yourself, and you can do that. You can still ask questions later, but I just wanted to pause for a moment and see if anyone had a question or a comment now. Otherwise, I'm going to go on to our second topic, which, is related but not related. Oh. All right. How are police in the US trained? Look, that could be its own question, independent of the Uvalde shootings. But because it was prompted, the person who gave me that question was very much talking about those shootings. Like, how is this possible that police arrived on the scene before that man started shooting and he still killed that many people? Like, aren't the people with firearms supposed to, be able to keep that from happening? I mean, that's what all of the rhetoric says, right? So this comes down to the question of, and also some people are saying, well, so now, those police are going to get in trouble, in some way. Folks, it's not likely that they will, right? There's not a big legal precedent for that, for holding police accountable to protecting human life. So I want to talk about police training and also the function of police and that question of legal precedents. So let's just be clear that traditionally, historically, the function of police is about protecting property. And in particular, in the very beginning, about protecting slave owners when slaves would flee and try to, end their bondage and torture. And so this is, given that is the place that this institution of policing comes forward from, I think that's important to hold on to, right? So the police have always been about serving the norms and values of the society. So the most obvious way that that happens is laws. If you break a law, the police are supposed to apprehend you so that you can be tried because you are innocent until proven guilty. This on its own, I think, is something that we have forgotten in modern times, that it is never, never the job of police to punish, because we have that whole innocent until proven guilty thing. Peacefully apprehend and bring to a body that can decide guilt or innocence. So these are the functions of police. So laws, when I say upholding norms and values, laws, but also the other norms and values we have that may be not codified into law. So when you look at who are the people who have always been over policed, who have always been brutalized by police, that's going to include people who do not have property, people at the bottom of the socioeconomic scale, people of color, people who are gender non-conforming, social norms and values. Again, any people who are seen, sex workers, for instance, who are seen as not conforming to the norms and values. And I said sex workers, but that also could include any woman who is not conforming to having a man with her protecting her at all times, right? She is fair game for abuse. So this is important to remember, like, what are the functions, even though nowadays to protect and serve is on the, it's written on the car for a lot of police officers. And that seems like it means everyone. And it does, except it also doesn't, because all of these things can be true at once. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, right? So that's the thing about function. The thing about legal precedents is that a lot of times the courts have tried to hold police officers accountable for their failure to protect human life. And so far, that doesn't work, right? So on-duty police officers, there's not actually a legal precedent that says they have to protect citizens. Under very specific circumstances, they need to protect citizens. Those include things like the people they are holding in custody. They're supposed to protect them. They're also supposed to protect people they have directly endangered, right? So like, if you're walking by and there's a shootout, they're supposed to protect you because you're a bystander there. But wow, just the people like children in the school? Yeah, not so much. And I'm going to just mention, in case you're taking notes here, here are some cases you might look up to see how this has, there has not been legal precedents decided on this. Warren versus District of Columbia, for example. DeShaney versus Winnebago County and Town of Castle Rock versus Gonzalez. Those are 3 examples. And those are examples, by the way, from an account called The Law Says What. You can look them up on YouTube and TikTok and I don't know, a variety of other places, but they provide those examples. There's another example too that I think is really interesting and makes sense to talk about in this context. I think this happened in Colorado, and it was literally an officer who hid in a school for 50 minutes while, a number of students were killed. This is maybe 10 years ago. That was in Broward, Colorado, and he was called the coward of Broward, but was he prosecuted for that lack of action? He was not. So there's the deal with precedents. Okay. Why might these police not be acting? And even though, we do have an expectation that they will protect human life, God, at the very least, that they will protect elementary school children. Here's the deal. There are so many different ways for police to be trained. There is no standard for that, like nationally. So different cities and states and counties and areas handle this differently. The average amount of training for police in the United States is 21 weeks, about 840 hours. That is significantly less than a lot of other first world nations, developed nations, right? There's also a thing about, is this training stress-based or is it like classroom learning? Now, there are reasons why you want a combination of both. There's also the issue of like, what is the style of training? So for most training programs in the United States, the style of training is a military model. It is a break you down to build you up kind of model. We're going to break you down as a human being, build you up as an officer, right? This is how it works with military training. Break you down as the human you came in as, build you up as a soldier. There's a problem with this, though, is that creates conformity, but it does not create learning. I mean, think about that for a moment. It creates a group of people who can take orders well. It does not create a group of people who are good at decision making, who are good at negotiation, because folks, negotiation and conflict resolution, these are skills that have to be learned in an environment where you are able to ask questions, where you are able to, fail and revise and learn. But if you are only in a situation where there's no way for you to ask questions and you should not show failure, you're never going to learn those skills. You're also never going to learn them in a very short period of time. But I do want to say, so about half of all recruits are trained in academies that use a training model that is stress-based, which means, you're like out in the field learning to do a thing. Non-stress training models emphasize, like I said, more academics, more critical thinking. About 18% of recruits are trained that way. And about a third balance those two approaches. So there is this whole thing about policing. What I'm describing is also what makes it very difficult to reform. It makes things like implicit bias training or de-escalation training or mediation or conflict resolution training, things that you absolutely want police to know. It makes it really impossible for that to take place in a meaningful way that isn't just like a short little add-on. And I want to just report to you, as somebody who provides anti-bias training, I mean, it's one of the things that I do. I can't tell you how often, and I've never done it for police, by the way, but I have done it for community groups that include police, and I've done it for school districts, and I've done it for nonprofits. And I can't tell you how often somebody calls for training and I suggest a certain, dosage, and what they end up wanting is, an hour and a half that people kind of can do optionally on their lunch, right? That's not helpful. That's not useful, even though that then becomes part of the story that, yes, they provide that training to folks. So, I was going to read you this quote from Eric Misselt, the director of Minnesota Board of Peace Officer Standards and Trainings. Quote, "You can have the best training in the world, but at the end of the day, it comes down to morals. It comes down to the culture of an organization. It comes down to what is tolerated." And this is another really powerful way to look at training, is as part of organizational culture. So unless that is reformed, training also does not mean a whole bunch. It's also possible for police to seek training outside of what has been, directly approved by the state, because the state is only offering you like this much, right? And so it's possible that you are a person who wants additional training. But the thing is, you can find really kind of nefarious training as well, like warrior style training courses. In Minneapolis, the officer who killed Philando Castile a few years back went to one of these training programs, and the mayor was so horrified by the curriculum, he banned Minneapolis officers from attending those trainings in the future. But the police union, which is hugely powerful, was reportedly so upset about this that they tried to find ways to continue making the courses available to interested officers. So sometimes this is not just about the lack of training, it is about the additional kinds of training that people want to pursue. I have a little more to say about this, but gosh, does anybody have questions or comments so far?
We got a message in the chat.
Let's see. Yeah, the lack of prioritizing of de-escalation techniques or police in general is so disheartening. It is so disheartening. And Emily, would you share, please, the 2 articles that I am offering on this topic? Because one of them has a graph that shows how our amount of training and where it focuses differs from, significantly from other countries that we think about as doing a better job than we do. Hugely, hugely upsetting. By the way, I'm always interested in the demographics of a thing as well. And about 73% of police academies provide data. It's shocking to me that they can fail to provide this data, but about 73% of academies provide data on the sex of recruits. And we're at like 15% female. And so that is still a huge, huge male-dominated profession. Used to be a little bit more, right? But back around in the aughts, more like 17 to 18%. But within the last decade, it's gone down a little bit. Someone about to say something?
That was me. You're saying gone down.
Yes.
It looks like Ellen unmuted.
Kimberly, I just wonder, there's having conversations about this. I think I've had a lot of conversations about police force, and it actually helps to understand even more of the history and the idea that they need different tools. I think of the hashtag of defunding the police, where it's not so much defunding the police, it's just giving them different tools and maybe demilitarizing the police.
Yeah.
But how can we take action?
Yeah. I think that the efforts of the Black Lives Matter efforts, from the summer of 2020 are the right efforts, but they did not lead to widespread change yet. They led to greater awareness. So I feel like we're still at a place where awareness is important. And I hope that one of the things that comes out of this experience with Uvalde is that people develop an awareness of the fact that those officers are not liable for doing nothing, because it is not actually part of their job. So what happened immediately with this slogan, defund the police, was that people who don't want to consider reform, just were like, well, that's ridiculous. Who are you going to call when something happens? But but look, when you look at all these details, it's like, well, this is why people say defund the police. Like, we need to literally start over and design something that works for public safety, because this does not. Now, there's a thing I'm going to just tell you a little story about, which you may have heard in the news, about the Uvalde massacre of those school children. The police that were on the scene there, largely what they were doing was trying to control parents who had come to the school to get their children because they had heard there was a shooter, right? So there was this woman, Angeli Gomez, I believe I have her name correct. She got there and was like, I'm going in and getting my kids. And they handcuffed her. And she was like, you're not doing anything though. I gotta, take these handcuffs off of me. And so as soon as the handcuffs were removed, she jumped a fence, ran in while there's still gunshot happening, ran in and found her children were like second and third grade. She ran in and found the second grader and told the whole class, look, listen to the shooting where it is. There's still time to get out. That whole class got out and she ran over to find her second child, at which point again, police tried to apprehend her. And she said, I think this is a very important thing she said to police in that time, because they were saying, you can't go in there, you will endanger yourself. Now, remember, under which circumstances are police bound to protect people? It is only under those narrow circumstances where they are bystanders or they are in custody. And she said, I don't need your protection. I need you to help me go rescue these children. Now, that needs to be amplified, I believe, again and again and again. That what we want from police is assistance in creating a more safe and just society. So, it still is not clear. I mean, she was threatened. She claims she was threatened by police, that she'd be in big trouble if she talked about what happened that day. But there, of course, you can look her up in the media and there's pictures of her bringing her two children out safe. But this is, I think we need to have more discussion about the very specific ways in which the police force in most places is not functioning as people believe it is. And that's why defunding it and creating something that works for what we want, which is, school children ideally so there's a shooter to be quickly and successfully protected. But what really happened on that property was something predictable about the control of people that our society wants under control. A group of Latinx parents who were angry, trying to go pass, where police wanted them to pass. And that became the focus of police rather than the actual deadly thing that was happening, children being massacred by automatic weapons. So, Ellen, I don't know, I think that we can never know ahead of time what is going to be the one thing that breaks the rock and creates the change. But I do think that continuing to have conversations, especially to get back around to why are people saying defund the police, that it's not just like, I hate the police, I'm mad at them. It's like, no, this is an institution that's not actually functioning the way that most Americans believe it should be. And it is, that saying about a few bad apples is a few bad apples, the rest of it is spoil the bunch, right? Spoil the barrel. And so, the defund the police thing is really about, oh my God, we actually have to throw out the barrel and start again.
Yeah. No, that's very helpful. Thank you. I know a lot of times we were talking about bullying at a school the other day, and it was in a professional environment, and I had to stop myself to say, yeah, the cops ain't going to do nothing until they're dead. Yeah. They're not going to intervene. No one's going to help beforehand. Um,
And
and
I wanted, I'm sorry, finish that thought, please.
well, and so this is, I like the phrase that you said, I don't look into it, you know, I don't need you to protect me. I remember getting a ticket, riding my bike home, you know, and the police were like, no, it's for your safety. I'm like, you know what my mother's going to do to me when I get home? The whipping I'm going to endure. I'm safer if I get hit by a car. Thank you very much. And so really that really resonates. I don't need you to protect me. I need you to help me.
Yeah. Yeah. That woman's interview, Angeli Gomez, you know, look her up. I'm sorry I didn't put the link for that. I think that needs to be discussed again and again in these multiple ways that are like what actually was happening, that controlling those parents became a more natural focus for 19 officers, right? Or was it 17? I mean, it was a lot of officers.
Yeah.
That became a more natural focus for them than actually stopping the shooter from murdering children. That's what we need to discuss in order to, you know, get at some of this, because it wasn't enough, right? The Black Lives Matter movement needs more of us to keep having these conversations and keep also lying down on the steps of politicians' office and keep doing all of these things. So, anything else right now on these cheery topics? I also want to just take a moment and say, not all police. Now, the reason I'm saying that is it really, remember, police forces are often county-based, city-based. They're very regional, right? And because I have worked with community-based coalitions for many, many decades, I have occasionally seen small police forces where a chief holds those people to a higher standard than is the norm, where a police chief really wants to make sure that conflict resolution is one of the things. Now, I think this is few and far between. And I think that, you know, back in the 90s when I was working more often with those kind of coalitions that involved police, I think it's probably worse now than it was then. But that quote that I read you about, at the end of the day, it comes down to morals and what will be tolerated. That is the organizational culture of a police force. We are not, you know, if you have an opportunity to vote for people who like police chief, or, you know, depends on how the politics are in your area, that's not for nothing. That's worth doing. It's worth doing at a local level to improve the organizational culture of policing, in addition to these larger reforms, which are obviously clearly vital. That's what I have for you today, my good dear friends. And I also want to remind you that we will do the Hope Desk next month, July, but not in August, because I will be in a time zone so different from this one. I'm not getting up in the middle of the night to do this with you. So August, no. Next month, yes. Anything else for today? Thank you so much for coming. And as usual, thank you, Emily, for your technical assistance. See y'all later.